there is somebody receiving the message. So whether that happens to be face-to-face in conversation, the communication process, how does it work? Well, there's somebody that's doing the communicating, that is delivering the message, and then on the other side, there is somebody receiving the message. So whether that happens to be face-to-face in conversation, through email, through text messages, whatever the channel of communication, there is somebody delivering the message and intending to convey a message, and there's somebody on the other end receiving that message. What happens in the middle? In the middle, the receiver might be distracted, there may be noise, you may be sending the message in a way that's not understood or is very clearly understood. So in the middle, as the receiver, you are interpreting the information that's being communicated. And whether the message is effective or not, you're going to perceive it and receive it in a certain way. So when you're picking the channel of communication between the communicator and the receiver, you want to be sure that you're actually eliminating or minimizing the number of distractions that could happen or distortions to your message. So you want to pick the means of communication that will be most effective to get your message across to the receiver. Let's move on to the channels of communication. When you're thinking about the channels of communication, I would like you to consider having a strategic conversation. And what I mean by a strategic conversation is actually thinking through the impact you want to have on the receiver. What message do you want that person to take away from what you are communicating? So you want to think it through. You get one chance to create that perception and you want to make the most of it. So there are a number of different elements to a strategic conversation. The first one is open communication, understanding what information you have to give, making yourself maybe a little bit vulnerable by sharing and giving some details that the person receiving the communication can feel your credibility, that you know something about the subject or the discussion that you're about to have. So being open, knowing what you can share is really important, and then being prepared to share it. The second part, and in my opinion, the most important part of a conversation, it might be counterintuitive, but it's effective listening. If you're communicating with somebody, to be sure that they're actually understanding, you need to be listening loudly to them. You want to understand whether or not they are receiving the message. How can you do this? First of all, you've got to try to stay out of your own headspace. Be sure that you're actually focused on the conversation you're having with the individual. And you want to be able to paraphrase back to the individual what you've heard them say. So listen loudly. We're going to spend some more time on that in section 3. The third part is really about discernment. And what do we mean by discernment? Discernment is how we perceive or how we judge the information that we're receiving. And we want to be sure that the receiver is perceiving it in the right way. So we want to be sure that the message we're sending is being received literally and in a positive manner to which you were trying to convey your message. The last piece, which I'll spend more time on again in section 3, is dialogue. There's a fundamental difference between dialogue and discussion. A dialogue is a communication between two or more individuals where you're really gaining a shared vision, a shared agreement. You're emotionally tied to the subject, to the message that's being conveyed. Whereas in a discussion, it's actually more of a debate. You're trying to defend your position. It's a back and forth. And at the end of the day, you might agree to disagree. So if you really want to have impact, think about the dialogue. Think about having somebody's head and heart in the message that you're trying to convey. The last piece you need to be concerned about when conveying that message is your body language. Depending on the nature of the conversation that you're having, I will share with you some tricks and ideas as we go through on how to actually utilize your body language to get your message across in a more effective manner. This comes particularly into play when you're having more difficult conversations, or when you're in a crisis mode, or even in a positive conversation where you might want to mirror the recipient's body language. There are many different tools that we can use, but you want to be sure that whatever body language you're using, it's totally aligned with the message that you're giving. There are different levels of what we will call channel richness. So I talked about the different channels of communication and the approach that you might use to giving your message, but there are different levels of richness within that communication. I want you to think for a minute about receiving a report. You receive a report, you're reading it through, you're highlighting, maybe making some side notes, but it's you and a piece of paper looking at that report. That is what we would refer to as a lower end of channel richness. Why? Why is it a lower end? Because it's really coming from the head. It's your logic. It's a level 1 stage of communication. Then you move along the continuum. That continuum might be memos, instant messages, to the far end of the continuum where we have a rich channel of communication. The richest channel of communication is face-to-face. It's one of the best ways of actually being able to utilize the body language, utilize the words, utilize the reaction and listening to the receiver to get your message across. Now, some of the disadvantages that actually go along with a face-to-face communication is you're not documenting and not recording the message as it's being delivered. So you want to be sure you're using whatever level of that channel that you need to be using. So there's a formal and then there's informal. And the formal types of communication, you would probably want to use the face-to-face as well as following it up in writing to be sure that you're documenting it. That would be a formal process of communicating. If a face-to-face meeting is impossible, many times you can pick up the phone. Nowadays, so few people actually talk to each other on the telephone. What do? They send these text messages. Well, the next best thing to a face-to-face meeting would be actually using the telephone. You can hear a lot by the inflection in somebody's voice, how they're responding. You can also measure the distractions when somebody's on the phone. Have you ever been talking to somebody and you hear that and you just know that they're not hearing what you're saying? So you're actually able to perceive whether or not the individual is receiving your message. It is another formal way of communicating. Informal communication methods. There are many different ways you can communicate informally. You can send out a memo to the organization. You might want to write a personal letter to somebody. That's nonverbal and it's informal, but it is a means through which you can get your message across. When is it appropriate? I can tell you if somebody really wants to get a message across to me, following a meeting or an introduction or a get-together, a personal handwritten note is always impactful. It's nonverbal, but it hits the heart, not just the head, that somebody would actually take the time to write a note, write a little letter just to say thank you, enjoyed myself, I really enjoyed your talk, whatever the case may be. So informal methods can be very impactful. In today's environment, the use of social media as an informal means of communication might also be a tool that you want to use to get your message across. It's time to practice. In the attachment, you'll find a number of scenarios that I want you to take a look at and identify the best channel for communicating the message so that it will be received in the manner that you feel will be successful. When you're trying to get a message across, you really want to understand how the person you're delivering the message to wants to receive or best receives information. There are many people I've come across in my career and in my lifetime where the person wants to read the information. They like to have it in writing, and they want it maybe 2-3 days ahead of actually having a conversation. In that case, if the person needs to receive it in writing, you want to be sure you give it in writing. There are other people that just say, no, I would much prefer to have a discussion. Understand the receiver. If the person wants to receive it in terms of a discussion, make sure you're flexing your style to how that individual likes to receive it. There are two different perspectives. Some people like to have a lot of detail and need to manage their way through that detail before they can truly understand a subject and receive a message. Other people prefer a 30,000-foot view. I would be completely lost if somebody came to me with 30 pages of detail. I would personally want a one-page summary on the front, or just get to the point, and if I have details that I need, I'm going to ask you, versus other people that might want to go through the details step by step by step to understand the message that you're trying to deliver. You need to be acutely aware of how the individual is receiving the information. The third element is the frequency of communication. Think about a child and a parent, an adult child and a parent. How often is often enough when you're communicating? Well, if you're a mom, you probably want to have a phone call once a day, and you'd be lucky if you get it twice a week. But if you're in a business situation, and you're reporting with employees, or you're delivering a message to a customer, you want to understand the frequency of communication. If you're getting emails every day, you know what that feels like if you're not wanting to receive those emails every day. If you want them once a week and somebody's giving it to you every day, you may be distracted and you may not be receiving the message. So you need to understand how often the receiver wants to hear from you. So you want to match your style and your channel of communication to the frequency at which the receiver wants the information. As I mentioned in section 2, listening loudly is one of the most effective ways of communicating. So what do I mean by listening loudly? Stephen Covey called it empathic listening. Empathic listening is where you are hearing the words that are not being said. So you might want to refer to it as reading between the lines, hearing the emotion, hearing the voice, hearing what the message truly is in the communication that's happening. Some people may be less direct, and they might want you to infer the message they're trying to deliver. So you really need to be listening loudly so that you understand how your message is being received. In order to listen loudly, the first thing you have to do is listen. I don't know about you, but if you're in a really deep conversation with somebody, what's going on in your head? What's going on in your head? You're thinking about the next thing you want to say to that person, rather than focusing on their words, focusing on listening loudly to what the other person is saying, then taking a short pause, collecting your thoughts about what you want to say, and delivering the message back. You really need to be present. You need to be mindful of what's going on in your own head. You cannot be thinking about what you want to say at the same time as you're trying to listen to what the other person is saying. One of the tricks that I've used, or tools that I've used to help me in that process, is to take notes. I actually write down what I hear the person saying, and I'll actually use little notations. This person was excited about this comment. Question, it sounded like that person might be unclear about that piece. So I actually write down what they're saying and a little emotional annotation next to it. That helps me stay focused 100% on what the individual is saying. I'm also positioned at that point in time to, in a very brief way, paraphrase back to the individual receiving the message what I heard them say. it's important to be heard as well as understood. So you want to be sure that the receiver feels that they're being heard as well as understanding what it is you're saying. We just spoke about listening loudly. How can you engage the person that you're speaking with in a conversation? How can you get them opening up about the subject that you want to communicate on? One of the ways is through the use of questions. Asking open-ended questions. What's the difference between an open-ended question and a closed-ended question? If I say, is it 3 o'clock? What's your answer going to be? No, it's not 3 o'clock, right? One word answer. No, it's closed-ended. There's only a yes or a no answer, which means you're not going to actually engage in a dialogue or a discussion. You're going to give an answer to a single question. If, on the other hand, you're using an open-ended question where you're inviting somebody to discuss a subject with you or share their thoughts on a subject, that question would require the individual to stop and actually think through the answer. An example of an open-ended question would be, what are the different steps involved in actually coming up with the solution? That would encourage the person to talk and engage about the steps that are involved, and it would allow them to actually think it through and then share back the steps that they're going to take to complete whatever that task is. And then if you say, okay, perhaps you can share with me how long you think each of those steps might take you. So what are the milestones? What's the duration that it's going to take you? Now you're engaging in a conversation about the time. I'm not asking anymore, is it 3 o'clock, where I'm going to get a no. I'm not saying, will you be finished by Friday, which you're going to get a no or a yes. You're getting some more detail and more specifics and engaging in the conversation with the individual. So that is the key around open-ended questions. The next element is moving from head to heart. If we're asking questions that are data-driven, like the ones I just spoke about, talk to me about the steps in the process, that is what we would refer to as a level 1 question, where you're answering based on data, facts. You're not actually thinking through what your perception is. Then you move slowly from a level 1 to a level 3. And a level 3 would be, how are you feeling about doing this project? Now you're engaging the emotion of the individual. You'll recall from section 2 when I started to talk about the difference between a discussion and a dialogue. If you're having a dialogue, you're moving into that level 3. Not only do you have the data, but now you're moving into the emotions that the individual might be having or experiencing in receiving the information. So you've just told somebody they're taking on a big project, you've just worked through what you think the milestones are, the steps are, and now you're moving to their heart. So how are you feeling about this? How are you feeling about getting on with this project? Let's move into a specific type of communication. Let's say you're trying to convince somebody to approve your process or make a decision. You want somebody to make a decision. This is not about selling. This is about helping others to make the decision over which they have control and you don't. So what are you going to do? The first thing you need to do is understand the type of decision maker you're working with. So Gary Williams and Robert Miller did a study in 2001, and they came up and identified 5 different types of decision makers. There are the charismatics, the thinkers, the skeptics, the followers, and the controllers. Now we're going to talk about each one of those individually. The charismatics are easily intrigued by new ideas. They love novel, new ways of thinking. Their experience has led them to explore those different ideas, so they will be readily willing to listen to your ideas. But rest assured that they will use their experience to balance their decision-making around the facts and the emotion, both. So you want to appeal to their head and their heart. The thinkers, on the other hand, are the most difficult type of decision maker to convince. Why is that? Because they want an argument that's very well supported by data. They also want to take the time to make the decision. So you might be in a situation where you have to present the data more than once or in different ways in order to get that decision from that style of decision maker. Skeptics have a different view of the world. They are the ones that will always look at it from a half-empty perspective. They're suspicious about new ways of thinking, particularly if it challenges their own mental models and their own way of thinking and their own view of the world. They're always going to find the reason why not. They can be seen as aggressive and a tough, take charge kind of person. So you want to be sure that you provide them with enough information on which their own assumptions are challenged. They will come to reason just as anybody else, but you may have to take a little bit more time and provide more information. Followers want to know that somebody else has already done it. They are the last to come on board in terms of new trends, new ways of doing things. They will never be the guinea pig in an experiment. So they're the ones that want to know which of their competitors are already using it, which experts have supported the new idea and the new way of thinking, what other companies have successfully implemented this idea. They want to know that everybody else has tested it out before making a decision. So if you're presenting and communicating with that type of decision maker, you want to come with all the expert opinions, you want to come with the facts. The last type of decision maker are the controllers. Now the controllers are all head, little heart when it comes to decision making. This is the group of people that actually want to focus on the data. They're going to look at that data and crunch the numbers, crunch the different what-if scenarios 10 times before making a decision around what to do. They are not going to become emotionally involved. They do not have their heart tied into any decision. You're not going to be able to appeal to their emotions. You really need to appeal to their understanding of the facts and data. They absolutely cannot stand ambiguity or uncertainty. They really want to have all of the facts in front of them before making a decision, which can really, in some cases, delay that decision. So I would not suggest going in expecting an immediate result. You may have to come at it from a few different perspectives. The next part of communication is around the concept of persuasion. Persuasion is about influencing others to agree or align themselves with your idea. It's not about selling, it's about influence, coming to that same place and agreeing on the possible outcome. So there are a number of different ways of approaching persuasion and different principles of persuasion. The first one is about liking. You've heard the old adage, people do business with people they like. You want to surround yourself with people like you and people you like to be with. And it's interesting, if you use just an example of, say, a home party. In North America, there's something called Tupperware parties, for example, where you sell home goods in the privacy of your own home. I can think of myself, when I go to these parties, if it's somebody I really like, I'm going to buy more because I like the person, not because I like the product. The same holds true if you're at work in the office and you're trying to persuade somebody. I am much more likely, and I'm sure you are more likely, to give in or share or do something for someone you like versus somebody that you don't like. The next principle is reciprocity. Big word, reciprocity. So it's giving back. So if somebody has done something for you, giving back. But if you're the one that's doing the persuading, it really is about giving before you're receiving. Being sure that you've reciprocated in kind ahead of the ask. So in the case of business, this might be sharing one of your top employees with another department for a project. And then when the time comes where you need support, that manager may be more likely to share an employee back with you in order to reciprocate what you've already given. So reciprocity is another means of persuasion. You know, it's like putting that dollar in the jar and waiting for the next day to call it. The next principle is around social proof. This is used quite often in charity or fundraising events where you're trying to persuade somebody to support your cause. In many cases, you'll hear people say, well, who else is giving to this cause? Who else do you have supporting this cause? And people align with others who have already supported it. So you'll see situations here where perhaps an actor has supported a specific charity, and others want to support because there is social proof that this charity is meaningful. Others have supported it, therefore I will support it. So what is your social proof? What social proof can you use or utilize in your conversation to actually get that other person on side? Another example of social proof would be a situation where you as an individual are participating in a big fundraising event. I'll use myself as an example here. I decided to do the Ride to Conquer Cancer. This is a huge fundraising event to support cancer research. It takes place in Toronto, and it's a bike ride over 2 days, 200 kilometers from Toronto to Niagara Falls. It's very well attended. I put myself out there. I told people, I shared it, that I was going to do this ride. And then lo and behold, you know, at that point in time, I had one other person that was interested in doing it with me. We started sharing the fact that we were doing this and ended up with our company in the United States and our company in Canada pulling the two teams together, and we ended up with 23 riders and raised $78,000. That's social proof, where people jump in and want to do it because they feel the excitement and the value that one individual or two individuals have brought to a cause. In that case, we used our personal influence, both myself as well as one of my colleagues. We used our personal influence to share with others what we were doing. And the excitement and the passion that we had around our cause was contagious, and others caught on and grabbed a hold of it and wanted to get involved, whether it was with donations or actually doing the ride. The next principle is consistency. If you've done it once, you're more than likely to do it again. So if you're trying to persuade somebody who's given in the past, they might give again now because they've done it in the past. It's interesting, once somebody has signed up for something once, how quick they are to renew it. So appealing to consistency when you're working with somebody and trying to influence their decision or getting them to come on board. In a workplace, you might look at decisions that were made around budget approvals. Well, they've approved the budget for this event last year. Why not approve the budget for the same amount this year? They approved the marketing campaign last year. Chances are they'll approve the marketing campaign this year, appealing to that sense of consistency as a principle. Another example of consistency is treating an existing customer the same way you've been treating them and getting that repeat business over and over again. It's always much easier to persuade an existing customer than it is to go out and get a brand new customer. The fifth principle is around authority. This is where you defer to an expert in the field to support making a decision. Businesses do this all the time through the use of consultants. They bring experts in to support their opinion, to support their view in order to persuade and influence a decision maker. A personal example around authority is the experience that I've had in terms of doing business turnarounds. I've successfully turned around 7 different businesses. Well, the first one, I had to convince people. I had to work very, very hard to get people to take the risk on some of the decisions that I was about to make. But by the time I got to my second and my third, I was seen as an expert in my field. And as an expert in my field, people were much quicker to empower me to make the decisions I wanted to make without seeking approval, because they knew that I was an expert in that space. The final principle is around scarcity. People value what is scarce. You know as well as I know that when somebody is making a decision around a scarce resource, we only have 3 positions left to fill this trip. 3 positions. Now you're starting to think, oh my goodness, I better decide soon because it's scarce. Or we've got a big game next week. I just got this information. It's a piece of scarce information that can be used to persuade a decision maker. Scarcity creates that sense of urgency. It's not one that you want to use all the time, but when it's appropriate, it can be highly effective. Another example around scarcity would be filling positions on a board, for example. If there are only 12 positions in total, and now somebody's in a position where they have to make a decision. Well, what if I decide to do this in January? Will I still be able to do this in January? The answer would be no, unfortunately, I can't guarantee that that position is still going to be available in January. If it is at that time, you're welcome to come back and have a chat with me, but otherwise, you're taking the chance of it being filled and not being available when you're ready. You can see by that conversation that you're appealing to the sense of scarcity and urgency around making that decision sooner than later. Now let's talk about styles of talking. How we present ourselves and how we use our voice can have a tremendous impact on our ability to influence and bring somebody the message that we're trying to deliver. There are a number of different ways. The first one that comes to my mind is about sharing credit. Rather than holding all the credit for yourself, sharing the credit of a situation with others, speaking in a positive way about others who are in the room will send a great message to those receiving the information. Think about a great first quarter. You're the president of the company. It's a great first quarter. You're out in front of the staff. You could choose to say, hey, we just had a great first quarter. You could choose to say, I've had a great first quarter because you're the president. But think about the impact on the audience if you choose to say, wow, you guys really knocked it out of the park. We have had a great first quarter. Sharing the credit with others instead of owning it yourself. Modesty, being somewhat modest about the achievements that you've had. Being humbled by the achievements of others. We'll talk a little bit later about cultural differences, but there are a number of conversational rituals that usually happen to be sure that you're in the same place. Think about those meetings where people come in and they get right to it. There's no pleasantries at the beginning of a conversation. How does that make you feel about listening to that person? You want to be sure that you are exchanging those appropriate pleasantries. In some countries, it's really critical. Countries where family is very important, asking about one's family, sharing some personal information. That takes place before you get into business. You want to be sure that you've exchanged those pleasantries and those rituals, if you will, around conversation before getting into the message you're trying to deliver. Another piece would be around giving feedback. Being careful around giving feedback. In most places, in most situations, my go-to is give feedback if it's negative in private. If it's a constructive challenge, find a way of presenting it so that it's not judgmental around the individual, but it really is focused on the data, the solution, or the facts. Taking that personal piece out of it is important to being heard and listened to. In some situations, you might want to give a positive comment to somebody or a compliment. You'll want to be careful with this. Be sure that you are sincere. Because if you're giving compliments just for the sake of giving compliments, they may not be received in the way that you intended. You want to be sure that if you're complimenting somebody, it's truly from your heart and make it have impact. Another piece is around your own personal authority. If you're coming into a room and you need to own that room in an authoritative role, your tone of voice, getting to business, being formal, structured, might bring more authority to the message you're going to deliver. If I was walking into a room with a very serious message to deliver, I might skip the pleasantries. I might choose at that point in time to go for gaining the authority and the position of influence in that room because of the nature of the message. So using the tone of your voice, if I'm up here saying, oh, I got this message to deliver, it's not the same as if you would come into a room and say, I have a number of serious issues we need to discuss today, so folks, I think we best get to it. It's a very different tone of voice. So you can manage how people are perceiving and receiving that piece of communication through your own speaking style. Persuasion is an art. There is a technique that you can use and learn and practice to be successful at persuading others. One of the first steps you need to take when persuading others is to gain credibility. You need to establish a baseline to show that you have the information, you have the credibility, you are the expert, and you actually do know what you're talking about. It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody that they really don't know what they're talking about, but they sound so great. And you sit back and think, how do they know that? Or 3 weeks later, you find out that they really didn't know what they were talking about. But when they were establishing themselves and their credibility in a conversation with you, they sounded incredible. Another way of approaching credibility is around gaining that common ground, finding that place where you have something in common. Whatever the subject may be, you will find a place of commonality. Whether it's sports, you find a sport that you have in common, or a point about your family you might have in common, or a place you visited you've had in common. Once you've built that common ground, you want to be sure that you reinforce your position, because you've appealed to their head through your credibility. You've appealed to their heart now through your common ground and building that rapport. Now you want to go back and utilize that emotional connection to reinforce the idea that you're bringing to the table, or what it is you're trying to persuade the other individual to do. Let's walk through it one more time. You've established your credibility. You're building the common ground. You're going to connect emotionally, and then you're going to reinforce your idea back to the point that you're trying to persuade the individual on. The power of silence. Silence can be used as a highly effective communication tool. There are a couple of different ways. Knowing when to be silent and when silence can be destructive is really important. So think about a conversation that you're in and you're asking questions. We talked about open-ended questions. You want to be able to use and feel comfortable with a pregnant pause or silence while the person is thinking. A couple of pieces that come with that. Number one, if you don't fill that silence, the person that you're asking the question of feels obligated to speak, because you're not going to talk until they've actually answered your question in one way or another. That can be a highly effective use of silence, allowing the other person to think before they speak. When is it destructive? It can be highly destructive if you're asked a question and it's a question that you have the answer to and you choose to be silent. You choose to not answer the question, not participate in a conversation, not even connect with the other individual. At that point in time, silence is destructive. It's not helpful. So you want to be able to use silence as a tool. Try it. It's highly effective if you actually take the time to listen to the other person, and the best way to listen is not to talk. Another situation where a moment of silence is appropriate would be if you're having a discussion around something that's highly personal. So you're really appealing to the individual's heart, and it's creating an emotional moment. Don't feel obligated to fill that silence or that emotion with words. Allow the emotion to be experienced. So if somebody is sharing a story with you, perhaps you've appealed to them on a common ground, you've had a shared experience, maybe it's a loss of a family member or a bad experience in work or some sort of a traumatic situation. They're sharing it with you and they get emotional. Allow that emotion to happen. Be silent. Be supportive. Many people are tempted to deflect in that situation. They feel uncomfortable with the emotion, so they try to lighten the mood with humor or changing the subject or moving to a different topic. You don't want to do that. That silence demonstrates respect, that you actually care person to person about the individual. Allow it to happen and move to other discussion points that may even be deeper. Let's go to level 4. We talked about level 3 listening, where you're actually appealing to the heart. The more emotion, the more you can use silence, the better the communication is going to be. Sometimes all you really need to do is acknowledge, whether it's through your facial expression, a gentle nod, a hand on a hand, whatever the case may be. Staying silent can be highly effective while using other means of communicating. On the other hand, a situation where silence may not be effective and may be more destructive would be on a phone call. You're now having an intense conversation with a business partner or a customer or an employee or maybe a family member, and you're talking and you're assuming they're listening, and all of a sudden you stop talking or they stop talking. You know they've stopped talking and you don't acknowledge it. You don't say, yeah, I'm here, I'm listening. Oh, acknowledge what they've said, paraphrase back something they've said. Staying silent in a situation where the individual cannot see that you're really listening to them is inappropriate, and people will feel let down. You will break that emotional connection or tie you've had in that communication. Do you remember a time when somebody was having a conversation with you and you realized that they were absolutely not being sincere? They were just saying the words, but they really didn't mean it. Nothing can drive a person more crazy than somebody putting on a show for the sake of putting on a show. What's the message here? Be authentic. Be who you are. Be true to you as an individual and a person, and your sincerity will come through. It'll come through in your voice. It will come through in your words. Be sure to listen. Show your own passion. Show your own emotion. Tell the stories from your perspective. Share your experience with others. It's really important that you not put on a show. Do you remember the used car salesman stereotype? That person that comes up and he's going to give you a great deal on a used car. You think, oh my goodness, where did that stereotype come from? Well, it came from that lack of sincerity. If people truly feel that they're giving you something of value and they really feel that this is the right choice for you, it'll come through. So you want to be sure that when you're communicating, you are authentic, you are being real, and you're not putting on a show for somebody else. Another great tool for communication is storytelling. Think about those parties or engagements you've been at where you've got that person in the room who's sharing experiences and they're just telling a fantastic story. People gravitate towards that individual. They want to hear the story. They want to hear what the ending's going to be, what happened. When you have the opportunity and the situation is right, sharing a story to create that connection with somebody is always helpful. You can call it giving an example, but it's always great if you can put it in the form of a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, what you planned on doing, what you did, and what the outcome was. It can be very intriguing. People will want to know, well, what was your experience? What went well? What didn't go well? Tell me about that. Using different examples can really support the message that you're trying to deliver. It also creates a bit of fun if you tell a story. You're not simply sticking to data and facts, you're telling a story around an activity that's happened. When is a story not a good idea? As a leader, you may be in a situation where you're going to have to squash something before it gets too big. Think about the grapevine and the great stories that are along the grapevine. Well, the grapevine could be a rumor, and that is not a story that you want to be telling. That is not something you want to be doing in communication. It can be seen as very negative, and it can reflect on you as an individual who's sharing a story or willing to listen to that sort of story. You want to be sure that you know what it is you're talking about and be careful not to allow storytelling to move into the realm of gossiping. Let's practice. In the attachments, you'll find a number of descriptions of situations and different styles of communication. What I'd like you to do is match the style to the description. In this next exercise, pay attention to the two different discussions that are taking place. What I'd like you to do is identify the style of communication. I'd also like you to identify what was effective versus what was ineffective in terms of communication. Hi, Ellie. How are you doing?
I'm great, Lorraine. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that time of year is here again. We've got 2 weeks to get the budget together for next year. I've got a board meeting I've got to get to.
Okay.
And I'm really counting on you to help me. I can see it, you know, we really need 15% increase in sales. And when I'm thinking about 15% increase in sales, I'm thinking about maybe 5% from the cosmetics range, maybe 2% from the toiletry range. How about 3 or 4% from, you know, the accessories? And then, of course, we're going to have some...
Why don't we... Sorry to interrupt. I just want to get this out really fast. I have this big idea that I want to throw at you. I want to hold a huge event. 100,000 people attending this event. And I think it's going to be great. We'll get all of our new product lines up. We'll have people testing them. And everyone's going to have the products in their hands. It's going to be amazing. It is going... Like, what do you think? What do you think?
How are we going to do that? I mean, where's the money coming from, Ellie? Where's the money coming from? We've got line by line by line. What about all the overheads? What about the budget for marketing? We don't have that kind of money set aside. Don't you think we should try to figure out where the money is going to come from specifically before we go and work out this big campaign? What if your big campaign doesn't work? What are we going to do then?
It will work. You've seen our competition has done something similar to that. In the past, their numbers blew up. They made the budget. They found room for, they found a way to make it happen. And look how well they've done.
Okay, Allie. Okay, I get that you're excited. I get that this is something you want to do. What I'm going to need, though, is the breakdown. I can't go to the board with this big idea. I've got to be able to take that big idea and translate it into the numbers that I need to put on the spreadsheet and put the plan in front of the board. Can we work together on this thing?
Yeah, we definitely can work together.
Okay, I'm happy to consider your idea, but let's get specific. Let's get down to the details, okay?
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hi, Allie. How you doing?
I'm good, Lorraine. How are you?
Oh, it's been a tough one, Allie. You know, we sat down last month and took a look at the numbers.
Yep.
Let me share the numbers with you for this month.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yep.
We actually are down 30% in revenue, and this is our third quarter down 30%.
Okay.
You can only imagine what I'm hearing at this point.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
I
That's
know.
tough.
It is tough. And I'm going to have to make some tough decisions. And I've done a lot of soul searching on this. And Allie, I know you've got a great team, but I'm going to need you to cut 5 people from your team.
5 people.
That's right.
I just hired 10 new people like 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
I understand, but we're just not making the revenue to sustain it. And we need to take cost-cutting measures today.
These guys, they are doing everything they can to even be a part of this company. Like they're already working more hours than they're supposed to. They're doing everything. I've got them stepping out of their comfort zones, doing more, trying different things. They're learning, they're taking courses on their own dime to be here.
I can see how painful this is for you, Allie, and I know I hear how close you are to your people and how excellent they are, and I know they're trying. I hear what you're saying.
I can't even think of one person. Like the team is a team for a reason. We work so well together. Everyone gets along. We just had that big event. We bonded all weekend. Wow. And now I'm going to have to kick people off the team.
Allie, there's no other way. I've really looked at all the numbers. We could cut a lot of money out of our overheads and our fixed costs, but we would not achieve the goal that we need to achieve. The only line item that we can actually go after are the head count. You're not alone in this. The other departments are going to be facing the same thing. Is there something I can do to help you? Perhaps sit down and we could look at it objectively, take a look at the people in the department, perhaps rank them in terms of the skills and the impact on the business?
That would be helpful. I don't want to do this, so I'm going to need a second set of eyes on helping me figure out who we need to let go. And if you're willing to, I know it's my responsibility, but I just, I've built such a bond with my team that I can't be the one to deliver the news to them. Would you be open to telling them the bad news and talking to the people that we need to let go?
Well, let's compromise. And yes, I can feel your pain. I can feel how close you are to the people, and I know that you want to keep that relationship with the people that are staying.
I do.
So my answer is yes. Let's sit down over the next week, figure out which 5 are going. I would like you in the meeting with me when I'm sharing the news so that they know you're there,
okay.
But you can be there to pick up the pieces as they leave and support them and support the people that are going to remain.
I would like to. That's the biggest thing, is keeping a connection and a bond built with the people that are going to stay. So thank you.
No problem. I'm sorry to have to do this, but it is a difficult situation that we're all facing. I appreciate your support.
Thank you.